I was a history major in college. And one thing I found out, if you don't know your past, you're bound to repeat all the mistakes that were made. So Black history is very important, but I wish Black history was every month. I wish we were in the history books and that the contributions of Black people were taught along with the history that is taught, and so that we wouldn't have to have a Black History Month. But it's what we have because we haven't been able to get the textbook publisher, the people who write the textbooks and the publishers to write us into the textbooks. So this is better than nothing. But it's very important, you know, in the South, in the Black churches, they used to teach Black history along with the Bible verses. And so many of us my age grew up knowing all of the history. In fact, I had it in school too. I had Black history. I had courses that were titled Black history courses. Nowadays, if we say, well, we're going to teach something about Black history, we have to make sure that everybody else's history is involved, and that's as it should be. But those of us who have the Black institutions still alive need to be the ones who are pushing for Black history, and the leading institution is the Black church. You're going to get an argument from some people, some older people, who don't believe that that's important, but it has meant a lot to me as a Black person to go to Africa and to be able to connect. When Africans said to me, "Welcome, sister," I really felt good. You know, like get cold chills. I really connect in terms of when I went to Timbuktu, to know the history of what Timbuktu used to be and what has transpired throughout the years in terms of the history of that continent and how it was destroyed by the colonization from the European countries. The culture is still downgraded in Africa, but I really feel very closely to the art, particularly the history of particularly the French-speaking parts of Africa, because those are the ones where it seems most of the Africans came from that were shipped to this country. My people came from a part of northern Senegal and into Mali, where they were rice growers. And when they came to this country, they already had a skill that they brought to this country. They were not savages. They had a skill. They came here and taught the people in Louisiana how to plant rice, which became one of the staples for the Louisiana agriculture down in Louisiana, was the growing of rice. And that area did not, until the slaves went there, rice was not grown. But they brought this culture with them and contributed that to that section of this country. I was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and my father and mother divorced when I was 4 years old. So I didn't live with my mother. My father raised my sister and I, and he was a marvelous father. He did not have any education. The little town that he came from in Louisiana did not even allow blacks a school. There was no school for him to go to. He could not read or write when I was born. But when I started reading, I taught him to read. And after he learned how to read, we used the newspaper. He always took the newspaper. We always got a newspaper. We always had magazines and books in our house. And once he learned to read, then he decided he would go back to adult school and get a little bit more training. He was a carpenter. And I had to teach him how to make out a bid for his jobs. For example, he did little jobs like he could, put a porch. Most of these houses that he fixed up were rental units that that people hired him to take care of. So we had to learn how to make a bid on the job with the amount of material that he would need, how much it would cost, and how much his labor would be at so much an hour. So I'd teach him how to make that bed out, and after a while he knew how to do it himself. But he really treasured education because he did not have the advantage of having any. I went to Catholic school. I went to a boarding school when I was 5. It was a Catholic school in New Orleans. My father chopped wood in Mississippi during the Depression to send my sister and I to this boarding school. He got married again when we were, I think I was maybe 10 or, no, I was a little bit older, about 10, 11 years old, something like that. And we came back to Baton Rouge then to live with him. And it was during this period of time when he built his house. I was telling you about how the black craftspeople helped each other build their homes. And he built a nice 2-story house, and he always had Chevrolet trucks. I don't know why he loved Chevrolet so much, but he loved Chevrolet trucks. And I finished high school at a public high school because they did not allow me to go to the Catholic high school. But I have to tell you that I got a good education. I think an education in any school, and I tell kids this all the time, you don't need a pretty building. You don't even need up-to-date books, because you can go to the library and get up-to-date information if you need up-to-date information. We didn't have any of those things. We got the hand-me-downs, the books that the white school sent. We didn't have a nice building. We didn't have nice lights and all of this. But we had marvelous teachers who really cared about us and made sure that we learned if we wanted to learn. And I think that I was very motivated to learn. And I told kids the other day when I went to Fitch, I learned how to learn. I learned how to be a good student. I learned how to sit in the front of the classroom because it looks to me like if I sat in the front, I could not only see the teacher better, I could hear the teacher better, and I could understand better. And I was closer to the chalkboard. And I wanted to make sure that I got everything that she had to offer, everything he had to offer. So I made sure, and I never did like to sit in the back of the classroom. And I would cry if the teacher would try to make me sit in the back of the classroom, because I really had the initiative to want to learn. And I got that from my father. I remember when I was maybe 12 or 13, my father bought me a typewriter. And of course, kids don't even know what typewriters are today, but the reason why he bought me the typewriter was because I was told that I had to write letters for people in the neighborhood who could not read and write. And so to make it convenient for me to type these letters for these older people, he bought me a typewriter. Well, the summer he bought the typewriter to me was the summer that the atomic bomb was dropped on Japan. And it was such a horrific experience for me. We didn't see it on TV, we heard about it on the radio, and we read about it in the newspaper. Those were the only pictures that I saw. But I wanted to know more about this atomic bomb. And because I couldn't go to the library, I had to borrow books from people like my teachers who lived in the area and what have you. And I wrote a term paper. And the kids teased me, and my sister did too. She said, "Why are you writing this paper?" I said, "I want to teach myself. I'm going into high school. I want to teach myself how to write a paper." So I wrote a paper with a table of contents, a title page, a table of contents. I put footnotes. I had a bibliography, the whole works. And I didn't turn this in to anybody for any credit. It was a paper that I wrote to teach myself how to write a paper, and because I had a thirst for knowledge about what this atomic bomb was about. And I don't know if a teacher has ever seen that paper. I don't recall that I showed it to anybody. I did it because, during the summertime at that time, there wasn't a lot for us to do, particularly girls, and I've never been very much an outdoors person. My sister would be out there jumping rope and playing ball and what have you. I was probably in the corner reading a book inside. And one of my favorite places when I was a little girl was to be under the dining room table, because that's where I played with my paper dolls, under the dining room table, because I could be, that was my area, and nobody else wanted to be under there with me anyway. But I liked that, to have a place of my own. So I've always been a person who's read a lot, who looked for knowledge, to try to better myself, to know that I knew something that nobody else knew, or I didn't think anybody else knew, gave me great pleasure. So that having them tease me about the fact that I wrote a paper that I didn't even get a grade in didn't matter to me at all. That wasn't the purpose for writing the book. My remembrance is that mostly about, my father always said, if you have a talent, you're supposed to help people. God gave you a talent, and my talent was reading and writing, so I had to read and write for the people in the community who couldn't do it, the older people particularly, who didn't have the educational advantage that I had. But the greatest thing that I saw as a child growing up was people helping each other build their houses. We lived in rental units until I was, I think, maybe 9 or 10. And my father started then buying materials to build his house. And I didn't think this house was going to become a reality, just seeing some 2x4s, or I think they were big, what do you call them, floor joists or whatever they were, 2x6s and 2x4s and so on, that he started accumulating, and he had this in the side yard at the house that we were living in. And finally I did see it become a reality, that he started moving, he had a truck, started moving this down to the area, the lot that he had bought. And on Saturdays, my stepmother and my sister and I had the job of making sandwiches and putting beer and cold drinks on ice. And he would come with the truck and pick up the cold drinks and sandwiches and everything that we were fixing for the people who were helping him to build his house. And they'd work from sun up to sundown every Saturday. Of course, they didn't work on Sunday because they went to church. Now, my father might work some on Sunday afternoon. But mostly it was one day a week. But when you have 10 and 15 people there working, you got a lot done. So it wasn't that long before that house went up, because he had, if he had all of the supplies there that they needed, all of the lumber and the nails and what have you that they needed, and of course they brought their own tools with them. And when you have that many people down there working, then yeah, it didn't take that long for that house to really go up. You know, you go down there one day and there was nothing. Next day it was totally framed. My father would do the same thing. He would leave home on a Saturday morning, be gone all day, because he was helping somebody else build their house. And I saw many examples of people helping each other because they had the talent that was needed to do something that was for the good of the community. And I grew up with this kind of mentality that you were supposed to help. And my father expressly said, if you have the talent, you're supposed to help people. I have been, my husband and I were, both he and I were people who were looked upon in the community as the go-to people when people needed something. My husband was a counselor. And he worked at Seaside High School as a counselor. He also was a work experience counselor, which he counseled young people in high school about going into other than a four-year college, and trying to get the things that they needed to prepare them to go to a job, and getting them jobs that would help give them experience so that when they got ready to get a job, they would be able to have the experience that they needed to prepare themselves. When I got sick, I don't think I wanted for anything. People were calling me and saying, I'm going to bring you some fruit. I'm going to leave it at the front door. Have your list ready. Give me your list. I'm going to make groceries for you. Go and get your groceries. When are you going to the doctor? I'm going to pick you up and take you to the doctor. You know, I know that the people in this community have great hearts in terms of helping each other. And I have spent the last 2.5 weeks probably taking Pearl Carey to her doctor every time she needed to go, because I know she needed it. And I need to give back something to this community of the people who've been marvelous to me. Ruthie was here almost every day. If she wasn't here, she was calling me to find out how I was doing, what I needed, and what she could bring me. And yet she has a 90-year-old mother at home to take care of, but she finds time to come and help other people. The people in this community, they may not be helping each other build a house, but they certainly have hearts that they care about people, and they've tried to help people who need help around here. So I think it's continuing. I think it's continuing, not on the level that I'd like to see it continue. The problem that I have is that our young people don't get it. and somebody your age, for example, I'm sure you saw your parents doing a lot of things that you don't do. It hasn't passed down a lot. Hopefully there will be a generation after me, so that when somebody needs some help, need to be taken to the doctor, need whatever they need, that we're going to open up our hearts, and young people your age are going to do those types of things just because somebody did it for your elders, you know. And I think the best example that we can give to young people is to let them see us doing it. That they model after what we've done. Because we can preach all we want to, but the young people aren't going to do it unless they see us doing it. I could talk about my search for my identity. You know, I because of my skin color, in the 60s, for example, I got a lot of ridicule, because during the 60s, black was beautiful, and I'm not black. My color isn't black. But I wanted to be black so bad, I cut off all my hair and I wore Angela Davis wigs. People still tease me about those wigs, the big wigs that I used to wear. And they didn't even know that I had hair under those wigs. They thought maybe I wanted to hide my hair for other reasons. But being black in America has been a struggle. It's not only a struggle among white people, but it's been a struggle among black people. I happen to have gone to Catholic school in Louisiana, and they promote you when you know whatever they want you to know in that grade. And I got promoted a lot, so I graduated from high school at the ripe old age of 15. And I went to college between the ages of 16 and 18. I signed my first contract to teach school before I made my 19th birthday. So I was always the youngest person, but I've also been known to be an activist. I was out there during the bus boycott in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It wasn't nearly as newsworthy as the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, but we had our bus boycott in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I couldn't drive at that time, but I could be out there with my notepad, and I'd take people's names and where they needed to go and try to find somebody with the car to take them to their jobs and so on. So I felt quite a part in the civil rights down there in Baton Rouge. When I came here to California, I said, "Oh, we're not gonna have anything like that here." My introduction to Monterey County, after I married my husband, was the year that the 3 little black kids were killed in that church in Birmingham, in that bombing of that church. There was announced that there was going to be a march from Custom House Plaza to the City Hall in Monterey. And it was to be a silent march to show nonviolence. And I have been trained in nonviolence in the basement of Mount Zion Baptist Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And although I didn't go to that church, I was so pleased to be a part of working with Reverend Jemison and teaching us the nonviolence techniques and everything. And it held me in good stead when I came to Oakland for the 5 years I was there before I moved down here after I married my husband. But that entire march from Custom House Plaza to City Hall in Monterey, we were silent, we couldn't say anything, and people were yelling obscenities at us. The entire route. I went the entire route with tears streaming down my face because I was so hurt that I thought I was coming to California, which was the land of milk and honey, and I wouldn't meet things like that. But that hurt. It really hurt to think that I was so wrong about California. When I came here and I went downtown, I had a master's degree and some units beyond my master's because I had taken some courses when I was in Oakland. And I asked for an application blank. And the woman wouldn't give me an application blank. She told me, we don't have no jobs for you. And I had to go down on Broadway. And the first black person I saw, I said, I want to know who's the president of the NAACP. And the man told me, well, I don't know, but there's a man over there who has a cafe. Go over there and ask him. And I went in there, and this heavy-set black man was sitting on a stool behind the counter. And I said, who's the president of the NAACP? And he didn't know, but he called some of his friends and asked around. And I found out that the president of the NAACP was a white man, Cecil Bendel. And Cecil had a ice cream shop on Broadway, on Fremont. And Cecil called Dr. Black, who's a pediatrician in Monterey, and he's still a pediatrician. I see him at the hospital sometimes. And Dr. Black had to call down there and tell those people, you will interview her. And when I went down there the second time, the woman threw the papers across the desk at me. I said, that's okay, all I want is a job. I don't want you to be my friend. She said, take the papers home and fill them out. I said, no, I'm gonna fill them out right here. And I asked her where I could sit to fill out the papers, and she told me, there's no place for you to sit. You take them home. And I went over to a desk, and I got a little feisty. I threw all her papers on the floor, and I sat down on the chair and filled out the papers right then and there. The next day, I got a call to come for an interview. You know, I didn't know it would be difficult in California. Being a librarian was very natural to me. I could not go into the white libraries when I was a little girl. I think by the time I finished high school, I think by then the libraries had been integrated. But I remember going to downtown Baton Rouge to a bookstore, and the little lady's name was Lois Shortis. And I would go downstairs where the children's books were, and when I came upstairs with my book or two that I wanted to purchase, I would open up my hand, and she would take these pennies or nickels that I had in my hand. And I didn't know until many years later that this lady was giving me these books. She was letting me pay my pennies for them to make me think I was buying them, but she was giving me those books. And that was a part of a library that I was building then for myself because I couldn't go to the white library. But it was very important to me to have those books, and mainly because people didn't want me to have them. You know, the white people did not want us to go to the library. Even when they integrated the libraries and said that black people could come into the library, they took all the tables and chairs out. So you could go in and you could check out a book, but you couldn't sit there and read the book in the library or do your writing in the library. I got my master's. I was the first black to enter the library program at LSU, Louisiana State University, and I got my master's from LSU before I came to California. So when I came to California, I had high expectations that I could get any job that I wanted. And I took all of my credentials that I'd gotten from Louisiana, and I went to Sacramento, and I came away with I think it was 4 lifetime credentials. I got credentials in library science, in teaching junior high, teaching high school, social studies, and English. And there are people who have come to California and said, oh, I had to go back to school and I had to take this course and that course because California is different and it's harder and what have you. I got all these lifetime credentials just by going to Sacramento and presenting myself and my credentials to the people. And I had been told by people, well, Helen, go to Sacramento and tell them what you're prepared to teach and let them tell you what they can give you. And that paid off for me. I taught in Oakland at one of a school in Oakland that was 99 9/10% black. And I really enjoyed that experience that I had there. When I left Lowell Junior High, they replaced me with 2 white librarians because the school had grown to 1,500 kids. There were 1,500 kids. I was in that school in Oakland when the Black Psychologists Association sued the school district because they were just randomly putting black kids into special ed classes and had them, they had those kids buffaloed into believing that this was the right thing to do. I'd hear them in the library saying, oh, they're going to give that stupid test again. You just answer any kind of way you want to, and they're going to put you in class with us. And we don't do anything, and all we do is play and we eat. They let us cook and we eat and everything. We don't do no work. And there was one whole wing of Lowell Junior High School that was nothing but special ed kids. They were killing those black kids. And the Black Psychologists Association in San Francisco sued the Oakland School Board, and that was the beginning of a real revolution in terms of how they could test kids for special ed and how they could, what criteria they had to use to put kids in special ed. Monterey has always been very conservative. So we have had our battles over the 40 years that I've been here, particularly employment. I remember working with groups where we were trying to get some young men into the union, and the union wouldn't take them. We raised money to buy a young man some carpenter tools one time, only to have him go down to the carpenter's hall and sit there and put his name on the board, and you go in and you put your name on the board, and the contractors come in and decide, you know, who they want to interview. And those other carpenters would erase his name, and he'd come back and tell me, that isn't working. They always erase my name, and there's so many of them, I can't fight all of them. So he just left. We got a man who was working with the NAACP, a white man from Fort Ord, who had a PhD. And he took off every Monday morning so he could go and sit down there until that boy got a job. And we finally got a contractor who would hire him. But just to get one black young man into a union, that was before the days when they had schools that you had to go through the apprentice and everything. A contractor would take you on as an apprentice, and he would certify that you had learned what you're supposed to need to become a journeyman. But we couldn't even get the white contractors to hire these young men. It's been very hard. I married a soldier. I met James Rucker, whose family I knew in Louisiana, but I didn't know him. He was 9 years older than me. He left Louisiana to join the Army when he was 18. Well, at that time I was 10, so I didn't know him. I knew some of the people in his family. I particularly knew a cousin whose wife I taught with. And so when I came to California, to the University of California at Berkeley, to work on my doctorate, believe it or not, in library science, and gosh, I didn't like Berkeley. I got out. Well, my mother got sick, and this was the mother who didn't raise me. I never lived with her, but she had a stroke at 49. And I left California and went and tried to make things convenient for her after she came home from the hospital. I drew down my Louisiana retirement money. I drew it down and fixed up her house and got a bed, the kind of bed she needed and all of that. came back to California, and I didn't go back to school. Instead, I went to Oakland and got a job so I could start sending her money home because she didn't have anything. And even though she was a mother who I'd never raised me and I didn't really know her, she was my mother. And my sister wasn't doing it, so I had to do it. And after 4 years, I met my husband. I met him through one of his cousins. He came to visit her, and I met him at her house. And we were married, and I came here. And it was a good marriage, I have to tell you that. He was an honorable man, and he allowed me, and I say allowed advisably, but I was 30 years old. My life was kind of set, you know, in terms of stuff that I'd done in Oakland. But my husband was very good about supporting what I did, and I supported him. He was into a lot of military organizations out on the former Fort Ord, but he was also into education, into scholarships. He started the academic excellence program at Seaside High School, as well as the ROTC program. And I've had to fight some of my friends who weren't in favor of that ROTC program, but I really believe that the children who want to do that, who want to be in ROTC, for some children, this is what saves them. This is what they need in their life. They put on those ROTC uniforms and they act right. They go to class. They do right, you know. And so I'm really in favor of anything that will help children to get their sense of who they are and what they want to do in life. So I've been very supportive of that ROTC program, and I'm very much anti-war. I've marched with the demonstrators, the anti-war demonstrators and everything ever since the Vietnam War, but I'm not opposed to the military. I'm not opposed to soldiers. And I have to say that my husband, being in the military, allows me to have the standard of life that I have now, because he spent 20 years in the Army. My husband didn't have, I told you, didn't have much of an education. Only he went to 7th grade in Baton Rouge. And when he spent 20 years in the Army and got out of the Army, he went back to MPC. And in a semester and a half, he graduated from MPC. Another semester and a half, he graduated from San Jose State with a bachelor's degree. And then another year, he had his master's degree in counseling. I think it was counselor education. But he was the type of counselor that people like to talk to. And sometimes I'd get kind of jealous of the kind of attention. He particularly, women gravitated toward him. He had the kind of voice and the kind of counseling that they wanted to hear. They appreciated more. So a whole lot of my friends loved talking to him. And like I said, particularly at the beginning of our marriage, it was kind of, I got a little jealous about that, but I soon began to realize that he had this talent for doing that. So people who have talents, particularly in our kind of community, we can't live by ourselves. We need other people. The history of Seaside in the 40 years that I've been here has been a lot of the social, civic, all of the organizations around here have been led by blacks. Black people, a black middle class grew up here, mostly from teachers. We've had very few doctors who have come here, but we've had a lot of teachers come through here and live here, and a lot of people who worked at the former Fort Ord in civil service positions. The man who was at one time the highest ranking civil service person at Fort Ord lives right up the street, and he's a mathematician and statistician. He came out after he retired from civil service. He became a contractor and has made good money in this area, as has Mr. Glover and several of the other African-American contractors in this area. So, and we all lived, a lot of us lived up in this area. I guess I could have moved to Carmel, Pacific Grove, or to some of the other areas, but I felt very comfortable with the people here. And the kids who I taught here, I liked the fact that they saw me in church on Sunday. They saw me in the grocery store during the week. Their parents knew. My phone number has not changed in 40 years. Their parents knew they could call me if they needed not only information about their children or the schools, but since I've also been very much involved with the city, I was on the Human Relations Commission for a long time before I ran for city council, and I was mayor pro tem of the city for 6 years. So people know that if even if I don't know, maybe I know where to find the answer if they have concerns about their children, about their homes. It's not like a big town. It's a place where you can be a part of a neighborhood. And up until recently, living up here, I knew everybody who lived up here. But the demographics are changing a lot in Seaside now. A lot of the black middle class people who owned houses up in this area have left the area after Fort Ord closed. We found out the other day that during the 60s and 70s here in Seaside, there were realtors who were, people thought that they were buying their houses from. They found out these people weren't doing nothing but renting their houses because they never recorded the sale of the house. So therefore, these people still own the house after people have been paying for 20, 30 years on these houses. Those realtors still own those houses. And it wasn't until the redevelopment agency here in the city of Seaside came about and started looking into things like this that they found out that these poor black people would have been suckered out of their houses if that redevelopment agency had not gone in and told those realtors, you either give them their property or we will take you to court. And Carole McKibbin was the one who found this out, this information out. It's in the records. It's in the records of the city of Seaside. And the man one of the men who was responsible, he worked for the redevelopment agency. His parents lived here in Seaside. He went away to college, but he came back and he worked for the redevelopment agency. And he was at that program that we had at the golf course the other day, talking about the history of Seaside. So that day was just like chills down my back listening to some of these stories that we know have happened right here during my lifetime, during the time that I have been a person who has tried to help my people. So when I came to Monterey, which was in 1964, it was, I lived, my husband had a house already, so we lived down on Soto Street, and Seaside was segregated. Where we lived in the middle part of Seaside was the only place where blacks could buy houses. They couldn't buy houses on the fringes, on the side bordering Fort Ord. There was nothing up here. This was all vacant. And they couldn't buy in the Kimball area, and they had what's known as covenants on the deeds in these on the houses in those areas, where white people signed when they bought those houses that they would not sell to a black. And it wasn't until several years after I got here, and I've forgotten now exactly who sued for the courts to declare that those covenants were illegal and to strip them from all deeds in not only in Seaside but throughout the Monterey Peninsula. There were deeds of those kinds of covenants on houses in Pacific Grove and Monterey and in all the areas here. But in Seaside, they were only in certain sections. They wanted to restrict the black people to living in certain areas. Since I've been here now 40 years, it's hard for me to believe that I've spent the better part of my life in this town, and this is my town. It's like my hometown. My hometown of Baton Rouge, Louisiana is very alien to me now. This is home. And there were some other people who were here before me, like Brad Vaughn, and he's left here now, and others who tried to buy houses, who had, I wasn't in the market for a house until redevelopment came about. And by that time, we had James, so we wanted a bigger house. It didn't necessarily have to be in a, quote, better section. I've always wanted to live with my people. I want to live with people who want me. I don't want to live where people are not going to be nice to me. So instead of doing that, we bought this lot and got a architect to draw some plans up for us. And so we planned our house. We knew we would be older one day, so we didn't want to go 2 stories. And I knew I wanted a big kitchen. I didn't care for a dining room, but I wanted a big kitchen and other things that we have in this house. I have big rooms in this house, and people who come here usually say, oh, there aren't many houses here in Seaside with large rooms. In my bedroom, I have a king-size bedroom set, and I still have plenty of room to walk around. And we planned it that way, that this is what we wanted in the house. So it was very good that redevelopment came along, and we were able to purchase this house and this lot and borrow the money from the bank to build a house that's worth almost $1 million now, and we ended up paying $35,000 for house and lot. Those of us who were fortunate enough during those days to buy a house, and most of the houses in Seaside were owned by blacks, and most of the people on the city council, on the commissions and the committees, and if I give you a list of the social, civic, and fraternal organizations in this town, practically all of them are run by blacks. And they're the middle class people who have made up and supported this town for the 40 years that I've been here, and are still doing it. E. Walker James still does his Citizens League for Progress. Our fraternal and sorority organizations are still contributing to the Martin Luther King Day program and to many other programs that are being held here in the city of Seaside. The Kiwanis Club at one time was all white. As soon as blacks started coming in, all the whites left and went to the Marina Kiwanis Club, and so now the Kiwanis Club is all blacks. I've had this house full of people for some of my political things, because I've always been kind of political. But I have probably supported and walked my neighborhood for every presidential election, every election where we were electing a congressman or an assemblyman. And so I've known all my neighbors because of it. But things have changed so rapidly now that I don't know a lot of the people around here now. And nobody comes to my house I'm the only one who has a political sign in their front yard. I don't know if you saw my Obama sign, but my Obama sign is still out there because I'm really supporting him. And I went online today with the California School Boards Association just to see how far I can go with political campaigning in this campaign season, because being on the school board, there's some things I can't do, so I need to know exactly what I can do and what I can't do, but nobody can tell me that I can't put a sign in my yard, and I'm going to have several more out there because I'm supporting Jane Parker for Board of Supervisors, and I'm supporting Bill Moaning for the Assembly. So I have 2 people who I'm going to be supporting in addition to Obama. We've had our struggles in this era. We went through a horrible period during the 80s, 70s, and 80s when drugs just overran Seaside. Right here outside my house, the drug deal, the people who wanted to buy drugs would come right outside my bedroom window, make a U-turn and go back down here to the low-income housing, Del Monte Manor, to buy their drugs. We've had young people killed down there at Del Monte Manor. Instead of fighting it, the people in this neighborhood and the people at Del Monte Manor got together And we took pictures of people buying drugs out. We had all kinds of programs trying to get these young people off of drugs, but because there was no, our school district was not the best. The kids were dropping out of school and going into drug dealing and weren't able to find jobs. It was pretty bad around here. There was a time when we were having a lot of drive-by shootings. We were having young drug dealers being convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Some of them are still in prison to this day, from that period of time when we had a lot of the drug dealing and young people being sent to prison. I worked with a man called Lee Toller, and we did a lot trying to get young people to realize what they were being programmed for. In junior high school, they were being programmed. If you had a fight and the police were called, you got taken down to the jail, you had a record. And although they say, well, we're not going, it's just a juvenile record, it's not going to go on this record. Every time you go to court, they bring up that juvenile record. And that's how they got 3 strikes on these guys. Not because of things they did after they were grown, but they went back into their juvenile records and made it a 3-strike deal. And Lee and I, Lee particularly, I didn't go to a lot of the prisons. He went to the prisons and talked to the young people from Seaside who were going to be sent back into the community, trying to get them to get the right attitude that when they come back, maybe we could help them go back to school or get a job or do something so they wouldn't be going back to jail and back to jail. But we had quite a drug problem. The drug problem here is not resolved. The majority of the kids who, if a policeman right now saw 2 or 3 black kids standing up, they would stop and talk to them. We've had profiling, driving while black. Shorty Sherrill, son, who used to, he was picked up by the Cleveland Indians. He was a baseball player. He was stopped one day because of the kind of car he was driving, a nice car with the tinted windows and everything. And Shorty got a real lesson. Shorty was the baseball coach for the police league's baseball team. And his son got, and they arrested Shorty too, because Shorty happened to be passing by when his son was arrested. And he got arrested, and the police treated him badly. And he got a real lesson in being black in America. And a lot of it is their fault, you know, because they fall into the trap that's been set for them. They don't understand that they're black male in America, and you have to really prepare yourself not to be put into that trap. Yeah, my husband did a lot of counseling of young people along this line, and Lee Toller did too. But this has been, in the 40 years that I've been here, there are still some stories that I could tell you today that concerned black people in Seaside, because this area was predominantly settled by what was known as Okies. They were poor whites who came from Oklahoma. We still have a problem of trying to get our kids through the educational system. And even though I'm on the school board, I criticize the schools for what they're not doing for our kids, and particularly our black male kids. They continue to be the ones who are suspended and expelled, and the ones who are not making the grade and not passing the test that they need to pass in order to get out of high school. So it continues to be a struggle here. It's been a struggle for my 75 years of my life, and particularly for these 40 that I've been here in Seaside. It's been a struggle. I wish some kind of way that more of our kids were exposed to the knowledges that they need. My father didn't know a lot to tell me, to teach me, but like I said, he knew where to take me. And so we need to expose our children to more. It's just that they haven't been exposed to enough. They need to be taken to plays. They need to be taken to museums. When your culture is taken away from you, your language is taken away from you, what else is there for you to do but feel that you have no language and no culture, that you have to adapt to the white man's or the European stuff that's crammed down your throat? But you see, we've been so whitewashed that there are older people who'll tell you, "What you going to Africa for, Helen?" "What? I didn't lose anything in Africa." I said, "You lost everything in Africa." "What do you mean you didn't lose anything?" "You lost everything. That's everything that who you are. It was left back there. It didn't come forward with us." And that's regrettable. I feel very proud of where I came from and who I am and where I'm going. And I'm going to continue as long as I can to make sure that young people, particularly black young people, understand that they should know where they've come from too and whose shoulders they stand on, and that they have an obligation to bring it forward.
I reminisce. Yeah. Listen, just listen to the funky song as I rock on, and that's word is